it was you.
Imagine this. You find a secret, a dangerous secret hidden in your company's records, fraud, abuse, a lie that could hurt people. You know that exposing it is the right thing to do. Your finger hovers over the send button on an anonymous email. You press it, and you wait for the world to change, but it doesn't. Instead, a quiet, invisible war begins. Today, we are sharing 3 true, chilling stories of the silent and terrifying price of telling the truth. The true horror of retaliation isn't a loud confrontation or a dramatic firing. It's the silence. It's the sudden, inexplicable emptiness in your calendar. It's the polite, cold smiles from colleagues who used to be your friends. It's the performance review that praises your work, but questions your cultural fit. This is the terrifying reality of modern whistleblowing. You are not fired. You are erased. You are ghosted by an entire system, a slow, methodical, and utterly deniable campaign to make you disappear, leaving you to question if the secret you exposed was worth the price of your own professional soul. But you are not alone. By exploring these real accounts, from a padded expense report that led to a performance review, to an anonymous report that somehow leaked an identity, we will shine a light on the shadowy tactics of silent retaliation. These stories are a disturbing look at the corporate monsters that hunt not with claws but with process, policy, and a profound, weaponized silence. Now, before we expose the truth, make sure you are subscribed to Whispered, Fear, and have activated the bell, because some secrets are too dangerous to keep alone.
We don't tolerate disloyalty.
Our first story is about a quiet, corporate horror. It's not about a monster with fangs, but about a monster with a company credit card. It comes from a man named Mark, an accountant who learned that in the sterile, fluorescent-lit world of the modern office, the most dangerous thing you can find is not a flaw in the system, but a flaw in the character of the man who runs it. He discovered that the truth is not a shield. It is a target, and that the quiet, anonymous act of doing the right thing can be answered with a silent and utterly devastating campaign of professional retaliation. At 41, Mark's life was a balanced ledger. He was a senior financial analyst for Omnicorp Solutions, a massive, faceless logistics conglomerate with a gleaming, glass and steel headquarters in the Arts District of Dallas, Texas. His world was one of numbers of spreadsheets of the clean, objective, and verifiable truth of a balanced budget. He was a man who believed in the rules. He was meticulous, honest to a fault, and deeply, fundamentally a company man. He had been with Omnicorp for 15 years. He had started in the mailroom, worked his way through night school at the University of Texas at Dallas, and had slowly, steadily climbed the corporate ladder. His life was a testament to the idea that hard work, competence, and integrity were the keys to a stable, secure future. That future was a modest but happy one, a small brick house in the quiet, family-friendly suburb of Richardson. A wife, Emily, who was the warm, chaotic, and beautiful center of his orderly world, and 2 kids, a boy and a girl, whose futures were the silent, motivating force behind every long, grueling day he spent staring at a spreadsheet. His job at Omnicorp wasn't just a career, it was the foundation upon which his entire life was built. The man who would hand him the sledgehammer to break that foundation was his own boss, David Chen. David was a rising star in the company, a senior vice president with a charismatic smile, a Harvard MBA, and the kind of effortless, confident charm that made senior executives see him as the future of the company. He was Mark's mentor. He had championed Mark for his last promotion. He was a man Mark respected, admired, and, in the quiet, secret corners of his own ambition, hoped to one day become. The discovery of the mistake was a quiet, mundane, and purely accidental event. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Mark was doing his quarterly departmental expense review, a tedious but necessary part of his job. He was reconciling the corporate American Express statements for his team. It was a routine he had performed 100 times before, but this time he saw an anomaly. It was on David's report. A single, small but strange charge. A hotel bill for a weekend, a Saturday and a Sunday night at the Ritz-Carlton in New Orleans. The charge was categorized under client development. But Mark knew from a casual conversation in the break room that David had taken his family to New Orleans for a long weekend, a personal vacation. He frowned. It was probably just an honest mistake. A slip-up. David had likely used the wrong credit card by accident. He made a small, quiet note to himself to mention it to David privately the next day. But then, his accountant's curiosity, the professional instinct that had made him so good at his job, took over. He went back and he looked at David's expense reports from the previous quarter and the quarter before that, and he found a pattern. The pattern was a quiet, brilliant, and deeply fraudulent symphony of small, deniable mistakes. A dinner for two at a Michelin-starred restaurant in New York, listed as a team-building event. A series of first-class flight upgrades, categorized as client travel necessity. A monthly subscription to a high-end wine club listed under office supplies. It was a slow, methodical, and utterly brazen theft. 1,000 tiny, paper-cut-sized crimes that, when added up, amounted to tens of thousands of dollars of the company's money, being quietly and expertly siphoned into the lifestyle of a single, charismatic executive. Mark sat in his quiet gray cubicle, the data on his screen a cold, hard, and undeniable truth, and he felt a wave of profound and deeply personal sickness. The man he admired, his mentor, his boss, was a thief. He spent the next week in a state of quiet, agonizing indecision. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. His mind was a battlefield. The company man in him, the part of him that believed in the rules, in the system, knew what he had to do. He had a fiduciary and ethical duty to report it. But the husband, the father, the man with a mortgage and a mountain of bills was terrified. David Chen was not just his boss. He was a powerful and very well-connected man. To report him would not just be an act of professional integrity. It would be an act of professional suicide. He finally, after a long, soul-searching conversation with his wife, made a decision. He would do the right thing, but he would do it the safe way. The company had a system for this, a formal and supposedly completely anonymous ethics and compliance hotline run by a third-party firm. The system was designed to protect people like him, to encourage whistleblowing without the fear of retaliation. On a Friday morning, his hands shaking, he logged into the anonymous portal. He uploaded the evidence, the spreadsheets, the falsified receipts. He wrote a clear, concise, and utterly objective report, detailing the pattern of fraudulent expenses. He did not name himself. He was a ghost in the machine, a silent, anonymous agent of the truth. He clicked submit, and then he waited. For a week, there was only silence. A heavy, oppressive, and deeply unnerving silence. Nothing happened. David was still his usual charming self in meetings. The corporate world continued to spin, as if his small, explosive truth had never been spoken. The first sign that the silence was not a sign of inaction, but of a coming storm, came in the form of an email. It was from Human Resources. The subject line read, "Urgent, performance review meeting." His heart sank. His annual review wasn't for another 6 months. He walked to the HR department on the 50th floor, his footsteps echoing in the quiet, carpeted hallway, a feeling of cold, profound dread settling over him. He sat in a small, windowless room across from the head of HR, a woman with a practiced, sympathetic smile, and his own boss, David Chen, who was also smiling, a look of kind, fatherly concern on his face. The HR director began, her voice a soft, gentle instrument of corporate execution. "Mark, we're here today because we have some concerns about your recent performance." He just stared at her, his mind a blank slate of confusion. His performance had been flawless. He had just received a strong exceeds expectations on his last quarterly review. "There's a feeling among the senior leadership," she continued, "that your attitude has become negative, that you're not a team player." that your focus on small, insignificant details is causing you to lose sight of the bigger, strategic picture. We've seen a decline in your proactive engagement. Every word was a piece of vague, subjective, and utterly indefensible corporate jargon. It was a language designed not to communicate, but to obfuscate. I don't understand, he stammered. My work has been... David cut in, his voice a smooth, gentle balm of poison. Your work has been adequate, Mark, but your engagement, your loyalty to the team's mission, it's been lacking. I'm worried about you. We're all worried about you. And then, the HR director slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a formal, documented performance improvement plan, a PIP, the first and most public step in the quiet, bureaucratic process of being fired. He sat there in the cold, windowless room, staring at the document that was the death warrant for his career, and the final, horrifying, and deeply cynical truth of the situation crashed down on him. This wasn't about his performance. This was about his report. The anonymous hotline had not been anonymous at all. His act of integrity, his quiet, by-the-book attempt to do the right thing, had been a loyalty test, a test that he had, in the eyes of the company, catastrophically failed. The message was not in the words of the PIP, but in the cold, quiet subtext. Competence is negotiable, loyalty is not. The PIP was a slow-motion execution. His projects were reassigned. He was left out of key meetings. His own team, the people he had worked with for years, began to avoid him in the hallways, their eyes refusing to meet his. They all knew what was happening, and their silence, their quiet, fearful complicity, was the most painful cut of all. He was no longer a colleague. He was a ghost, a pariah, a man who had broken the one true, unspoken rule of the corporate world. You never, ever betray the man above you. The final devastating resolution came a month later. He was at his desk in a state of numb, quiet despair when he received an email. It was from a junior analyst in his department, a young kid he had mentored. The email was a simple, accidental reply all to a chain he had not been included on. The subject line was Project Apex Transition Plan. He read the email chain. It was between David Chen and the senior leadership team, and it was about him. David had written, "The Mark situation is now resolved. He has agreed to the voluntary severance package. The PIP served its purpose. His access will be revoked at 5 p.m. today. Let's all be sure to thank him for his 15 years of service and wish him well in his future endeavors." But it was the email below that, the one he had been accidentally copied on, that was the final soul-crushing blow. It was an email from the head of the third-party company that ran the anonymous ethics hotline. The email was addressed to Omnicorp's head of HR, and it was a notification of a new report. It was his report. It contained his entire, anonymous, and supposedly confidential submission, forwarded to the company in its entirety, less than 5 minutes after he had clicked submit. The system, the one that was supposed to protect the whistleblowers, was a lie. It was a tool, a trap, a sophisticated and brutally effective system designed not to expose corruption, but to identify and eliminate the disloyal. He was left with a knowledge that was a form of a living death. The world he had believed in, a world of rules, of integrity, of a fair and just system, was a complete and total fiction. He had not been punished for making a mistake. He had been punished for being right. He now lives with a quiet, chilling, and deeply unsettling question that haunts his every waking moment. In a world where the systems designed to protect the truth are actually built to protect the powerful, what is the real price of honesty? Had learned the answer. It wasn't just his job. It was his future, his faith, his entire, and now completely shattered sense of his own place in the world.
We know who you are.
Our next story is about the illusion of anonymity. It's about the quiet corporate promise that you can speak up safely, and the terrifying reality of what happens when that promise is a lie. It comes from a woman named Dr. Elena Reed, a scientist, who learned that the most secure, confidential reporting systems are not designed to protect the whistleblower. They are designed to identify them, and that the retaliation that follows is not a loud public execution, but a quiet, methodical, and utterly inescapable social ice age. At 36, Dr. Elena Reed's life was a testament to the beautiful, orderly logic of the scientific method. She was a senior research scientist at Biogenics Innovations, a cutting-edge biotech firm with a sprawling, campus-like headquarters in the heart of Cambridge, Massachusetts' Kendall Square. Her world was one of sterile laboratories, of peer-reviewed data, of the slow, patient, and deeply noble work of trying to cure the incurable. She was a woman who believed, with an almost religious fervor, in the truth of data. She was working on a project that was the culmination of her life's work, a new revolutionary drug called Restore, a compound that had shown incredible, almost miraculous promise in reversing the effects of early-onset Alzheimer's disease. The drug was her baby. It was her contribution to the world, and it was on the verge of entering its final and most critical phase of human clinical trials. Her life outside the lab was a quiet, almost monastic affair. She lived in a small, modern apartment in Somerville, a short bike ride from the MIT campus. Her life was her work. She had sacrificed relationships, hobbies, and a significant amount of her youth to get to this point. The success of Restore wasn't just a professional goal, it was the entire foundation of her own, hard-won sense of self-worth. The discovery that would poison that foundation was a small, almost invisible statistical ghost. It was a Tuesday night. She was in her lab, alone, the building a quiet, humming hive of sleeping machinery. She was running a final deep dive analysis of the Phase 2 trial data, a routine pre-check before submitting the results for FDA review. And she saw it, an anomaly, a tiny, statistically insignificant but deeply troubling cluster of data points. In a small subset of the patient population, less than 2%, the drug didn't just fail to work, it did the opposite. It caused a rapid, catastrophic acceleration of cognitive decline, leading to a series of severe and, in one case, fatal neurological events. The data had been buried, hidden in a mountain of otherwise overwhelmingly positive results. It was a needle of pure, unadulterated poison, hidden in a haystack of hope. She spent the next week in a state of quiet, obsessive, and deeply ethical panic. She checked the data again and again. The anomaly was real. She brought her findings to her direct supervisor, the head of the project, a brilliant but ruthlessly ambitious man named Dr. Jennings. His reaction was not one of scientific curiosity. It was one of cold, quiet, and deeply pragmatic dismissal, he'd said, his voice a calm, reasonable instrument of denial. It's a statistical outlier, Elena. The overall data is overwhelmingly positive. We can't let a 2% anomaly derail a drug that could help millions. We'll monitor for it in Phase 3. But Elena knew what that meant. Monitoring for it was corporate speak for burying it. To knowingly proceed with human trials, with a drug that had a small but catastrophic risk of killing the patient, was not just unethical, it was monstrous. She was left with a choice that was no choice at all for a woman of her principles. She could stay silent and become a complicit partner in a lie that could and would lead to human suffering. Or she could do the right thing, and in doing so destroy her own career, the project she had dedicated her life to, and the hopes of millions of patients. She chose the truth. She knew she couldn't go through the normal channels. Jennings would just bury her report and her career in a mountain of corporate bureaucracy. So she used the system that was designed for exactly this kind of situation. The company had a proud and very public ethics policy, and at its heart was the Biogenics Guardian program, a secure, encrypted, and supposedly completely anonymous whistleblowing portal managed by an independent third-party ethics firm. It was the perfect, modern, and supposedly safe way to report a concern without fear of retaliation. On a Friday night, from the quiet, anonymous safety of a computer at the Boston Public Library on Dartmouth Street, she wrote her report. She laid out the data, the statistical proof, the undeniable evidence of the drug's fatal flaw. She did not name Jennings. She just presented the objective, scientific truth. She was not an accuser. She was a scientist. She clicked submit, a feeling of profound, terrifying, and deeply righteous relief washing over her. She had done the right thing. The system would now take over. For a week, the silence from the company was absolute. It was a quiet, hopeful silence. A silence that she interpreted as the slow, methodical turning of the wheels of corporate justice. The retaliation, when it came, was not a loud, dramatic confrontation. It was a whisper, a change in the air, a quiet, social and professional ice age that descended upon her life with a chilling and utterly deniable precision. It started with a meeting, the weekly all-hands project meeting for New Restore. She was walking to the conference room on Monday morning, and she saw her colleagues, her team, the people she had worked with for 5 years, all huddled in the hallway. When they saw her coming, the conversation stopped, instantly. They just looked at her, and then looked away, their faces a mask of polite and deeply uncomfortable neutrality. She walked into the room, and the silence followed her. A cold, invisible shroud. The invitations to lunch, a daily ritual, stopped. The friendly hellos in the hallway were replaced by quiet, almost imperceptible nods. The collaborative emails, the requests for her input on other projects, they all just dried up. She was being ghosted. Not by a person, but by an entire institution. She was a ghost in her own professional home. The gaslighting was a masterpiece of corporate subtlety. When she asked her manager Jennings what was going on, his face was a mask of pure, convincing, and deeply concerned confusion. He'd said, his voice a smooth, gentle instrument of manipulation. "What are you talking about, Elena? Nothing has changed. You're being paranoid. You've been under a lot of pressure. Maybe you need to take some time off." He was not just denying the reality of her social isolation. He was using her own dedication, her own hard work, as a weapon against her, framing her legitimate concerns as a symptom of her own mental exhaustion. She was left in a state of quiet, maddening, and deeply lonely psychological torment. Had she imagined it? Was she being paranoid? The silence from her colleagues was a perfect, unprovable crime. There was no memo, no email, no official record of her excommunication. It was a death by 1,000 tiny social cuts. The final soul-crushing confirmation that her anonymity had been a lie came in the form of a simple and utterly devastating mistake, an accidental email. She was at her desk, in a state of quiet, isolated despair, when an email from the company's head of legal affairs, a man she had never met, arrived in her inbox. The subject line was, The Guardian Program Report, New Restore. Her heart stopped. The email was a short, simple, and utterly damning message. It read, "Moving forward, all internal communications regarding the anonymous report filed by Dr. Reed are to be handled on this secure, legal hold channel only. The IT department has confirmed that Dr. Reed's name was the only one associated with the data logs that were accessed for the report. Her identity is confirmed. Please proceed with the managed career transition protocol as discussed. Discretion is, as always, paramount." And below, the email she was not supposed to see, the one that had been accidentally forwarded to her. It was the original notification of her report from the secure, independent third-party ethics firm. And at the very top, in the hidden routing data of the email, was a line of text that was the death warrant for her career, submitted by E. Reed. IP address 72229. 85, Boston Public Library, Central Branch. The system, the one that was supposed to protect her, was a trap. A sophisticated and brutally effective system designed not to investigate claims but to identify and neutralize the people who made them. Her anonymity had been a lie from the very beginning. She was left with a knowledge that was a form of a living death. The company she had dedicated her life to, The institution she had believed was in the business of saving lives was a monster that was willing to sacrifice human beings for the sake of its own financial bottom line, and a monster that would, with a quiet, polite, and utterly ruthless efficiency, destroy anyone who dared to speak the truth. She resigned the next day. There was no confrontation, no fight, just a quiet, dignified surrender. She just disappeared. She is no longer a scientist. The managed career transition protocol was as effective as it was silent. Her name was quietly and expertly blacklisted throughout the insular and deeply interconnected world of the Boston biotech industry. The story that followed her was not one of courage, but of instability. She was the brilliant but difficult scientist who couldn't handle the pressure, a woman who had in the end been a poor cultural fit. She now lives in a small town in rural Vermont, a quiet, anonymous life. But she is haunted by a silence. The silence of the colleagues who looked away, the silence of a system that was designed to protect the guilty, and the quiet, chilling knowledge that the most dangerous lies are not the ones that are shouted, but the ones that are whispered in the confidential and utterly false language of corporate ethics.
You saw nothing.
Our final story is about the quiet, crushing power of a blacklist. It's about the invisible, unspoken agreements that govern our professional lives, and the terrifying speed at which a good name, built over a lifetime of hard work, can be turned to ash. It comes from a man named Frank, an electrical contractor who learned that the most dangerous secrets are not buried in the ground, but in the walls of a half-finished skyscraper, and that when you tell the truth about a powerful corporation, the retaliation is not a lawsuit, it's a silent, professional, and utterly complete erasure. At 54, Frank's hands were a roadmap of his life. They were the hands of a master electrician, calloused, scarred, and capable of a precision that was a form of art. For 30 years, he had been a proud member of the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. He had built a small but highly respected contracting business in Nashville, Tennessee, a city that was in the midst of a frantic, explosive construction boom. His company, Sparks Electric, was his legacy. It was a testament to his one guiding principle: you do the job right, or you don't do it at all. His reputation for quality and integrity was the most valuable tool he owned. His life outside of work was a simple and deeply happy one: a small paid-off house in the quiet Donaldson neighborhood near the airport, a wife of 35 years, Karen, who was the steady, unwavering bedrock of his world, and a son, Matt, a junior at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, whose tuition was the silent, motivating force behind every long, grueling day Frank spent on a job site. He was a man who had everything he had ever wanted: a family he loved, and a good name. The project that would take that name away from him was the biggest of his career. It was a massive 40-story glass and steel skyscraper being built by the corporate construction giant OmniBuild in the heart of the Gulch, Nashville's trendiest and fastest-growing neighborhood. The contract to be the lead electrical contractor for the project was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a multi-million-dollar deal that would guarantee his financial security for the rest of his life. It was the culmination of everything he had ever worked for. The discovery that this dream project was a nightmare in disguise was a slow, creeping one. It started with the materials. The electrical conduit that OmniBuild was supplying was a cheaper, thinner-walled aluminum, not the high-grade, galvanized steel that was specified in the blueprints and required by the city's building code. It was a small, almost imperceptible, cost-cutting measure, but one that Frank, with his 30 years of experience, knew was deeply, fundamentally unsafe. He brought his concerns to the site foreman, a hard, cynical man named Rick. Rick just laughed, a short barking sound. "It's fine, Frank," he'd said, clapping a heavy hand on his shoulder. The engineers signed off on it. It's a new, value-engineered spec. Just run the wire. But Frank knew. He knew that the cheaper conduit was more susceptible to corrosion, to damage from the other construction crews. He knew that a single, compromised wire, hidden deep within the concrete skeleton of a 40-story building, could years down the line become the source of a catastrophic and potentially fatal fire. His conscience, the same moral compass that had guided his entire professional life, would not let him stay silent. He followed the protocol. He filed a formal, written report with the site's safety officer, detailing the discrepancy between the blueprints and the materials being used. He was polite, professional, and objective. He was a man doing his job. The next day, the retaliation began. It was not a loud, angry confrontation. It was a quiet, bureaucratic, and utterly infuriating war of attrition. The delivery of the materials his team needed was suddenly, inexplicably, delayed. The permits he needed to sign off on his work were lost in a sea of paperwork. His team was reassigned to the most difficult and least desirable parts of the job site. A quiet, professional form of exile. He knew what was happening. He was being punished for speaking up. He was being sent a message. A quiet, deniable, and deeply menacing message. Be a team player. Keep your mouth shut. But Frank was a man of principle, and he was a man who had a deep and abiding fear of fire. His own father had been a firefighter, and he had grown up with the stories, the ghosts, of lives that had been lost to a single careless mistake, a single cut corner. He made the decision that would be the end of his career. He did what the company, what the system never expects a contractor to do. He went outside the chain of command. He made a formal and supposedly anonymous safety complaint to the Nashville Department of Codes and Building Safety. This was his act of whistleblowing, a final, desperate attempt to do the right thing. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. A city inspector arrived on the site the next morning. The work was halted. An investigation was launched. The foreman, Rick, didn't even look at him. But the other workers, the men he had worked alongside, for months they looked at him, and their eyes were full of a cold, quiet, and deeply resentful understanding. He was no longer a colleague. He was a snitch, a rat, a man who had broken the unspoken blue-collar code of silence. The official response from OmniBuild came a week later. It was not a termination. It was far more elegant and far more brutal than that. It was a short, impersonal email from a faceless vice president in the corporate headquarters in Atlanta. The subject line was, "Contract renewal." The email was a single devastating sentence. Please be advised that your company's contract for the Nashville Gateway Tower project will not be renewed upon its conclusion next week due to a strategic realignment of our vendor partnerships. He had not been fired for his safety complaint. He had been realigned. His contract had simply not been renewed. It was a perfect and legally airtight corporate execution. The loss of the OmniBuild contract was a devastating financial blow, but Frank was a survivor. He had a good name. He had a reputation for quality that had been built over 30 years. There were other projects, other companies. He started bidding on other jobs. A new hotel project near the Music City Center. A renovation of a historic building on Broadway. He was the lowest bidder on 3 major projects, and he lost every single one. The phone calls he made were met with a polite and deeply chilling wall of corporate doublespeak. We've decided to go in a different direction. Your bid was very competitive, but we felt another firm was a better cultural fit. The silence from the industry was a deafening roar. He was a ghost in his own city. The final heartbreaking truth of his new reality came from an old friend, a man named Mike who ran a competing, but friendly, electrical contracting firm. Mike had called him, his voice low, apologetic, and full of a quiet, defeated shame. Mike had begun, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Frank, I have to be honest with you, man, you're not going to get another big job in this city. Not for a long, long time." Frank had asked, though he already knew the answer. "What are you talking about?" Mike had sighed. "The list, Frank. You're on the list." The word came down from OmniBuild. You're a problem contractor, a safety risk, a disruptive influence. Your name, it's on the blacklist. The final, horrifying, and deeply human truth of his silent retaliation crashed down on him. The anonymous report had never been anonymous. The big construction firms, the ones that controlled every major project in the city, they had an informal, unspoken, and brutally effective alliance. They shared information. They protected each other, and the blacklist was their weapon. A quiet, digital, and utterly inescapable tool for enforcing the code of silence. His single, ethical, and life-saving act of whistleblowing had not just cost him a job, it had cost him his entire career. His good name, the thing he had spent 30 years building, had been turned to ash with a few quiet and untraceable phone calls. He was left with a knowledge that was a form of a living death. The industry he had loved, the city he had helped to build, had excommunicated him. He was a master of his craft, a man with a lifetime of experience, and he was now, for all intents and purposes, unemployable. He now lives in a quiet and deeply unsettling state of forced retirement. He spends his days in his small workshop, fixing lamps and toasters for his neighbors, his skilled, calloused hands a quiet, heartbreaking reminder of a life that was stolen from him. The skyscraper in the gulch, the one he had tried to make safe, is now a gleaming, finished monument to a quiet and deeply buried lie. And he knows that every single person who lives and works within its beautiful glass walls is a quiet, unknowing participant in a game of Russian roulette with a faulty electrical system. He is haunted by the quiet, chilling knowledge that the most dangerous conspiracies are not the ones that are plotted in secret, shadowy rooms. They are the ones that are plotted in plain sight, on corporate email chains, and in the quiet, friendly, and mutually beneficial handshakes of powerful men. And he is left with a final and deeply unsettling question. In a world where the truth is a liability and silence is a condition of employment, what is the real cost of a good night's sleep? A performance improvement plan that was a punishment, an anonymous report that was a spotlight, and a blacklist that traveled faster than the truth. These three stories are not about monsters with claws, but about a far more realistic and perhaps more terrifying kind of monster. The one with a budget, a board of directors, and a human resources department. The true horror of whistleblowing is not the brave act of speaking up. It is the deafening, soul-crushing silence that follows. It is not a loud, dramatic execution, but a quiet, professional erasure. It's the sudden emptiness in your calendar, the averted eyes of your colleagues, the quiet, collective agreement to pretend you no longer exist. It is a ghosting performed by an entire institution. These accounts force us to confront a chilling reality of the modern world. The systems we are told are built to protect the truth are often just sophisticated machines for identifying and neutralizing it. The most powerful weapon in the corporate arsenal is not a lawsuit. It is the silent, unanimous decision to rewrite the narrative. And they leave us with a final, deeply unsettling question. In a world where loyalty is valued more than integrity, what is the true cost of doing the right thing? If these stories have made you think about the price of the truth, prove you will not be silenced by subscribing to Whispered Fear, leaving a like, and sharing this video. Your support helps us to expose the secrets that hide in the silence. But what if the threat isn't a powerful corporation that knows your name? What if it's a complete stranger, a temporary ghost in the system, whose face you see for only a moment in the dark, just after you've accepted the ride? Click the video on your screen now as we get in the car for 3 true scary stories of fake Uber driver traps at night. See you there, if you're sure you're getting in the right car.